Hi, I'm Premee Mohamed. I am a writer and a scientist. I'm based in Edmonton, Alberta. I've got about 35-ish short stories out in the world in a variety of venues, and one novel so far, Beneath the Rising, which came out in 2020, and one novella, These Lifeless Things, which came out on February 5th. And I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, I guess what they're calling slipstream, weird alternate history, and sometimes all in the same book. And a lot of people have been asking for this, so I'm pretty used to this by now.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Okay. Well, thank you so much for volunteering. I mean, I looked you up and I was a little bit overwhelmed. I was like, my God, this woman wants to talk to me.
God, and I'm still so confused that this keeps happening. Some people reached out earlier in the year and last fall to ask if I wanted to be a guest editor for their venues. And I said yes. And at least in one of them, I got into the Slack when they sent me the official invite, and I scrolled up a little bit and they're all sitting there like, Premee said yes. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I'm like, oh my God, I don't understand. I have exactly one book out. I'm not a celebrity. I barely know what I'm doing.
So what is that book? What is the title?
Hang on. Can I just hit record here? You're recording. I can start recording, right? Okay. I'm just going to do that then. Okay. Yeah, that is Beneath the Rising, which came out.
And I bought that today.
Oh, did you? Oh, thank you for
I
supporting
really
me.
love it. It's a great book. I love the first sentence.
Oh, God. Thank you. Yeah, people are still contacting me about the first sentence. Like, they just jumped and they were like, I guess I can finish reading this. Yeah, it came out in March last year, like straight into the pandemic, like March 3rd or whatever. So,
I mean, we're all in lockdown. We need something to read, right?
that was my thinking. So the problem, I guess they were saying with debut novels, so you haven't got fans, there aren't people searching for your book in the bookstore, so they were saying to me, what you are missing out on is discovery sales, and that's where people just kind of bump into it in the bookstore. And of course nobody was doing that because the bookstores were all closed. So I don't really know how many sales I lost with this book and how many I'm going to lose with the sequel, but that's life. That's the publishing life.
It's a great book, and I mean, I was fangirling all over. Like, I took some notes here. I'm trying to be good. I was really impressed by Chuck Wendig's quote, like the recommendation that he gave your book. I love his writing. He is so awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, it's funny. When I learned that Chuck had blurbed my book, I was actually on vacation, and my editor forwarded me the email and said, "Oh, Chuck blurbed your book." I'm like, "Chuck who? Are you like on a first name basis
my God.
with Chuck Wendig?" But editors, right? And I was actually on holiday. I was sitting in a pub with two friends, one of whom was another writer, and I almost dropped my phone into my pint. I was like, "Oh my God!"
Yeah, well, let me see. Okay, I found it. A wonderful genre-defying adventure, rife with strange heart and weird horror. But most notable is its particular careful attention to its characters. You are a bold new voice.
Yeah, that was something.
That was amazing. I mean, like, oh my God, it would be like that. That's like second to Stephen King, like saying that my book is good, right?
Yeah, I was very, very, very A, flattered, and B, flattened by the people that blurbed my book. I'm so grateful to everyone. And, that meant that we could have like the nice little, the blurbs on the cover.
That's a beautiful cover.
So I was like, wow, oh, I love the cover. Yeah. I didn't notice the faces in it for like 6 months or something. And then someone else pointed it out and I picked it up again and go, bleh! I just thought it was, a design. I didn't notice the silhouettes.
Okay, so I've started this all wrong. Could you introduce yourself?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Hi, I'm Premee Mohamed. I am a writer and a scientist. I'm based in Edmonton, Alberta. I've got about 35-ish short stories out in the world in a variety of venues, and one novel so far, Beneath the Rising, which came out in 2020, and one novella, These Lifeless Things, which came out on February 5th. And I write sci-fi, fantasy, horror, I guess what they're calling slipstream, weird alternate history, and sometimes all in the same book.
Slipstream, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, I haven't found a good definition of it, but it seems to be categorized under the new weird.
Ooh, I love weird.
I also don't know what the new weird is. It seems to be authors like Jeff Vandermeer and China Miéville, both of whom I really like. So if that's what I'm writing, I'm happy to be classified as that. And if not, then that's okay.
So you're a scientist. Do you mind if I ask, like, what kind of scientist?
Yeah, my background was molecular genetics, and then I usually tell people environmental science, but it's actually land reclamation, which I think in the States is usually called land restoration, to differentiate it from land reclamation in Europe, which is literally reclaiming land from the sea. So definitely a language barrier there. And I currently work as an environmental policy specialist with my local government. But I've also done research, consulting, I've worked for industry.
Well, you really are busy. I mean, you have a podcast too, don't you?
No, I don't.
well,
I'm on a lot of people's podcasts.
You're like an assistant editor or something on...
oh, yeah.
I was looking at your Amazon bio. Like, I've been sleeping, right?
Yeah, I'm an associate editor, which is what they call the slushers at Escape Pod, and also one of their social media managers.
Okay. Oh, well, I don't know. How do you find time for all this? Like,
that's
one of the questions that I had for you. Like, I mean, time management, I think, is a really big concern for writers.
Yeah, I've been asking myself that a lot lately. I'm lucky in several senses. I think the main one is that I live alone. So despite the fact that I am working a full-time and often more than full-time job, I'm still only looking after myself. I don't get interrupted if I don't want to. I don't have kids. I don't have roommates. I don't have a spouse or whatever. Yeah, it's pretty sweet in some respects. It means that if I get a block of time, I can do what I want with the block of time. But it is also exhausting keeping up with housework and groceries and trying to keep myself clean and fed and hang out with my friends on Zoom and run errands.
Pandemic, you know?
And also there's a plague.
Who saw that coming, right?
Oh, God. Yeah, time management has always been an issue for me. It's even more of an issue now. I don't know how I'm managing. It feels like sometimes in like 2 to 8 second increments and scheduling stuff really far ahead and putting it in my Google Calendar.
So you're just like the rest of us.
Yes, suffering, but carrying on.
Okay, good. Sounds good. Okay. Would you mind saying a little bit? I mean, one thing that I'm always interested about, like when it comes to writers, like is what, I mean, it takes a lot of, I mean, tell me what you think about this. But in my opinion, like I think it takes a lot of passion to be able to commit to writing like a novel, you know, because that is a commitment. And I think you really need to be passionate in order to be able to do that, to stay the course and to go through all of those edits and, you know, the whole process. And I just wanted to talk to you about, like, how did you become passionate about writing? Like,
good question.
Like, when did you first start to write? Like, how old were you? Like, I mean, I'm really curious about your origin story.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, most people don't ask about that. So it's cool that that we're thinking about it, I guess. But yeah, my parents said I learned to read really young. They said 2, and I'm like, okay then. But
wow,
it's true that they have photos of me with books when I'm about 1.5 or 2, and I never remember not writing. I was always writing all over everything, like the walls, you know, construction paper, blah blah blah. Eventually they figured this out and started buying me notebooks. The first completed story I can clearly remember was when we had some temporary childcare issues when I was about 7 or 8, and my dad started taking me to his office, and he worked for the city of Edmonton. They would let me play with the markers and like the drafting supplies. So I'd be there with like these alcohol markers and these big supplies, P squares, and like learning how to use the letter sets and stuff like this. And of course, this is in the 80s. And I wrote a book called, I can't remember the title, but the main character was a cat named Smokey. He had his tail stolen, I think by pirates, so actually pirated, and he had to go after them, and he had adventures on the way. So I wrote and illustrated this whole book, and you had to like hold it out
You were
in
so
front of you because it just reeked of these alcohol markers that they used. I probably destroyed some brain cells.
That's so great.
Yeah, and I was all proud of myself. And there's my dad, like my dad's coworker, like, good job, buddy. I'm like, thank you. I needed the validation. But I don't know. I've never not written, and Beneath the Rising actually was, I don't know, my 8th or 10th novel. I would just write and write and write, and at some point I would go, okay, this doesn't have a plot. I'm putting the end on it.
That's actually another thing I wanted to talk to you
Yeah.
about. I think writers, before they come out with their first, like, I mean, your book is amazing. I love it. But a lot of times, like, I think writers, they have what are called trunk novels. I don't know
Oh
if you're
yeah.
familiar with that term, like novels that you sort of write and you complete, but you kind of put
Yeah.
away because you don't feel they're ready to kind of
Yeah.
see the light of
Have
day.
you heard Tales from the Trunk, which is a podcast that my friend Hillary does? And
I've got to.
oh, I love it because all the questions that they ask are, tell me about your trunk stories. When did you decide to trunk them? Do you ever untrunk stuff? How do you determine what goes in there? How do you determine what gets pulled out? It's such a good podcast. I love it. And I'm not just saying that because I was on it a couple of years ago, but it's just interesting to hear how other writers do it. You know, like when do you, especially for short stories, when do you just not submit a story anymore? Like when do you just say, okay, that's enough go rounds on this story I'm putting in the trunk?
Can you give like newer writers that might be watching this podcast, could you give them some sort of like indication of like how you did it? Like how did you make that indication that this isn't ready?
Yeah. So when I decided to start querying this novel, it was because I'd done some research on acquiring a literary agent. And for novels, they generally say, you know, unless you've been scouted or whatever, you have to have a completed manuscript. And this happened to be the only book that I had actually completed. Everything else was either not done or quote done unquote, but not a full complete story kind of from start to finish. So unfortunately, this novel just kind of went out the door because it was the default novel. And
It's great.
I'm very pleased at its reception, I guess. Again, considering that it was written when I was in my first degree, it was finished when I was like 20. So people were saying like, oh, it feels so, you know, real for the time. I'm like, yes, it was 2002 when it was finished. We were using Netscape Navigator. I can't tell you, like, people were wearing like the Gap khakis. Like I didn't have to try to remember all that stuff. I was a peer approximately in age with Nick. I was about 18 when I started writing it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you finished this in like 2002.
Yeah. And then I don't know, same with every other book I had ever written, and the 5 or 6 that I had written after that, I just sat on it because I didn't think publishing was something that I was interested in. And I keep having to remind, especially my writer friends of this, you know, writing and publishing are not the same thing.
Right.
And they shouldn't be conflated with each other. And often I see people, especially on social media, giving what they call writing advice. I'm like, that's publishing advice. That's not writing advice.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea of the passion sustaining you for the entire novel, I do think that's really important. And I know friends that have told me that they can power through writing a novel that they're kind of meh about because they just want to get the paycheck or whatever. And I'm like, I don't know that I could do that.
No.
You need to keep the fire going, otherwise you can't make it to the end of the book, kind of.
Yeah,
so many words.
Right. Yeah.
And then you get copy edits back and you're like, I wish I was dead. And then you have to do it again because the buyer is gone by that point, and you're like, I don't want to do copy edits.
So what was that like? So you finished the book.
Yeah.
And you submitted it. So tell me a little bit about this process. Okay, so you finished it in 2002.
Yeah.
And then you submit it to, you just send it off to the...
No, I sat on it till about 2016. I didn't think about it actually.
So did you get an agent?
Yeah, so in 2016, I decided I did want an agent. and that I was interested in publishing. I'd had a couple of short stories come out, and I was like, well, why not novel? Could pay better money. So yeah,
Wow, look at that. You get some money for writing. Wow.
exactly. Yeah, it took like a couple of samples, so I got paid for a couple short stories, and then I was like, more.
You got
Which is terrible, but yeah, I got a taste for it. Yeah, and so yeah, I polished up the novel a little bit. I wrote a query letter, and I made up, the query spreadsheet with all the agents that I wanted to query, and got signed pretty quickly, about 6 weeks after I started querying. So that was nice. And that meant that I had to like rearrange my entire year though, because I assumed I would spend the whole year looking for representation.
That's
But
amazing.
yeah, it worked out. I think the timing just worked out really well. I love my agent. He was also looking to build his list. And so things just kind of meshed. And then he also gave it a light polish, sent it back to me. I gave it a polish. And then we started submitting it to, he started submitting it to publishers, and then it got purchased by Solaris in a 2-book deal. And I guess the fact that there was not a second book was not an issue for them. And I wasn't thinking about it.
You could do it again, right?
I think that's what they were thinking. And I was like, oh, sure. No problem. I'd never written a sequel, so I had no idea what I was doing. But yeah, it sold in a 2-book deal. And I was like, well, I'll deal with the second book when the second book is due. And then, yeah, so the editors, looked at it and sent me back an edit letter and some comments on the document themselves. So then we did that. Then I sent back that version. Then they sent it back for copy edits. And then I sent back that version. And then it was ready to go.
So I was wanting to ask you about that, like the whole process of getting like feedback on your novel. Like what sort of, when you get back like copy edits, like suggestion for how you, like what could you give me an example of like what they would request?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And again, this is particularly weird for me because again, after writing for like, 30 years or whatever, with no one ever reading anything I wrote except for me. Because again, it was my hobby. I just wrote because I liked writing.
Really?
And I liked being in the world, and I didn't see the point of somebody reading what I was writing. I'd be like, what's the purpose? Yeah, I had a blog. Yeah, my best friend hosted it on his domain, so that was nice. It was like a free blog.
Yeah, they're great.
But yeah, it wasn't any of my fiction. It was just, we did a road trip down to Calgary. Here's some photos. Especially back then, before social media and stuff like that. So I was kind of interested to see what I would get back for my very first ever edit letter, because all the short stories are kind of different. Like you only get you get back the Word document and there's 2 or 3 comments on it and you just send that back. It takes like 10 minutes. But a novel, my God, this is like 110,000 words. What am I gonna?
Really? Wow, that's sizable.
Yeah, it's about average for sci-fi and fantasy, or on the low side for some of them. But yeah, I kind of sit there and I look at that number. I'm like, how did this happen? But yeah, so the edit letter, things like maybe we can move this scene to this scene. Maybe we can have this happen after this happens. Maybe we can condense this so that what comes after it is more meaningful, that kind of thing. So the big structural level stuff. And then you get to copy edits, and it's mostly just they're suggesting you change the semicolon to a dash, or they're fixing a spelling error, a typo, although by that point the manuscript was pretty clean. Or stuff like, I noticed that the car is missing in this scene. Where did the car go? I'm like, I don't know where the car went. Copy editors notice these things.
These details.
And yeah, we had totally lost the car. The car's like way across the city by that point. So
you just blow up the car.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm like, yeah, I'll just put in a sentence here where he says, let's not drive the car. There, I fixed it. So that kind of thing. And then yeah, it was pretty painless. So that was good, I think. And I've got a good rapport with my editor there as well. He also acquired another book, the one that just came out in February. So I was working with him also to get comments
that's
back
good
on that. So that was nice. Yeah.
Well, I have to say, I was really taken with your opening line. My earliest memory of her smells like blood. I thought that was really evocative.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And and I was just wondering, like, I'm a fan of Stephen King.
Mhm.
He's a big fan of opening lines. Like he says that the first thing that he gets when he starts to write a novel is the first line.
Mm.
And I was just wondering, like, when did that line come to you? Was it before you started to write the story, or did it come afterward, or like
Uh,
do you
I
remember?
think kind of probably around the midpoint of when I was originally writing it. And again, at this point, this is like 20 years ago, almost 19 years ago.
I know I'm
But
asking both of you.
what I think what I wrote first was the airport scene. And then later I went back and added the first little chunk. It
Uh-huh.
was actually later on when I think when Johnny's telling Nick how they met. And I actually like copied and pasted that back into there because it seemed to fit a little bit better at the start. And it, I thought, asked some questions that were kind of better to have before anybody knew anything about the book,
Mhm.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it was very evocative. Like I really liked it. I guess one thing that I really liked about your book was you have a strong voice. That's
Well,
what it
thank you.
seems to me.
Yeah.
And I was wondering. I mean, it seems to me that at least for me, like one of the things that's it's a bit mysterious. Like it's a dark art. Like a writer's voice. Like how do you develop your voice? And I was wondering if you had any like tips for people, just starting out. Like, I mean, how do
That is a good question
uh,
because yeah, and I could, reading the manuscript, I kept thinking, oh boy, my voice has really changed, obviously, in the past like 18 years or whatever. But how? I think the story is what shapes the voice, and especially when I think about short fiction. So quite a few of my stories are set, say, in different periods, or um, narrated by somebody who is very, very unlike me, or have a focus on a character who's very, very unlike me. One of the ones that I'm thinking of is the one that ended up in Lackington's, At the Hand of Every Beast. And so the voice for that story is kind of stiff and formal. And it's set in 13th century or 14th century France with this magical cathedral. And I had people ping me afterwards and saying, I liked the tone. It felt very Gothic because the theme of that issue was Gothic. And I was like, okay, good. So that worked. And for my self-published novella, The Apple Tree Throne, this is hilarious. When the audiobook company produced it, I thought they were going to give me a code for a download. They actually sent me physical CDs. I was like, where can I play this?
Plays a CD.
Yeah, exactly. So for that, I was kind of, the voice that I needed for that was about 1899 English. And, I needed the first person narrator to sound like he was from then. So I don't, and this is probably, not the gospel, but I don't think that a writer has a voice so much as a story has a voice. And unless a writer is writing lots and lots of things that are pretty well the same, a writer's not going to have an identifiable voice. For instance, I think Stephen King has a very identifiable voice, or two voices, possibly. He writes one way for sort of the more fantasy stories, like the Dark Tower series. So that's one voice. And he has another voice for the contemporary horror stories. But after a page or two, you kind of know it's him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Whereas for my stuff, maybe that's possible, maybe it's not. But I think from story to story, it's different enough that people might not be able to identify it.
Yeah, he has a very strong voice.
Yeah.
So who do you have, like, who inspired you in terms of writers?
Oh, I don't know. I read a lot of Terry Pratchett growing up. Diane Duane, for sure. In fact, if I hadn't read Diane Duane, probably Beneath the Rising wouldn't exist because I loved the idea of her two young wizards so much. Of course, Nick's not a wizard. Nick has other problems, but I liked the interplay of the two friends discovering that magic is real and what they do with this knowledge. So her Young Wizard series, I read that when I was a kid, and it just obviously sunk in very, very deeply. I love Umberto Eco, probably
Oh
my
yeah,
favorite
yes,
writer.
yes.
Yeah, I have so many of his books. Nick Harkaway is a favorite who has not written a zillion books, but I've loved every single one of them. Yeah, I think those are the main ones that pop to mind. I read a lot, but I also do a lot of rereading.
Mhm.
So
So do
it's like
you,
the same, like, you know, 50 books over the past 10 years plus a handful of new ones.
yeah, I like the golden oldies.
Yeah,
I'm a rereader myself.
awesome.
Um, so you think about like when you think about writing and like your success, like obviously, I mean, you've had like success in writing like more than a lot of people do, and would you what do you think about the importance of like reading to being able to write?
Hmm. Uh, really, really important. I know that as we're discussing Stephen King, I just read On Writing like a couple of weeks ago for the
Oh,
first
really?
time.
It's my favorite
Yeah,
book.
I'd never read it before. And when he talks about if you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write. Or if you aren't reading, you probably shouldn't be writing.
Yeah.
And I think about that a lot. I think that is absolutely, along with your life experiences and stuff, but I think that's absolutely the way that you fill up kind of your mental warehouse so that you have raw material to process into a story. And I keep finding in the slush piles of the places that I'm editing or guest editing at, people who kind of visibly, I can kind of tell right away, the other slushers can tell right away too, that they're not doing a lot of reading, or
Yeah.
if they are, they're not doing a lot of contemporary reading.
Ah,
And their stuff feels very golden age, kind of 1930s to 1960s, but it tells me that they're not reading a lot of stuff that's coming out right now. It's a very different tone. The structure's different. The characters feel different. The setup of the story and the use of language, everything like that just feels out of time. And you find yourself thinking, I don't know that this person has read a ton of current short fiction. Just as an example, reading is how we tune our own voice when we write, and it's how we tune our ear when we revise to kind of tell ourselves, is this a strong story or not?
right.
The way we compare that is not to our own stuff, it's the stuff that's already been published and edited and vetted and made it out into the world.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. So, I mean, another thing that I wanted to ask you about is your writing routine. Like, because you're going to be, are you working on your next book right now?
Yeah.
So,
I'm working on a bunch of things right now. Yeah, it's funny. I don't really have a routine. I have really, really severe inattentive type ADHD, which for medical reasons I cannot medicate a lot of the time. And also I have also there's a plague going on, and also pretty severe anxiety. And so I've had to learn how to write around different things in the past couple years than I have previous to that. And there's not really a routine per se anymore. It's if I find a block of time and there's something that needs to be written, I'll open it up and work on it if I can. And I get a lot of writing done on weekends. Um, most of the time, although not for the past couple of weeks because it's all been book promo and stuff and working overtime. Basically, what I do is I log out of work, uh, have something for supper, and then start like second shift, basically writing for 5 or 6 hours.
essentially, you're a workaholic. I'm getting that feeling.
Yeah. Well, it feels kind of sad that there's nothing else to fill the time, but I don't know. I'm going to a lot of writing conferences and stuff because
Oh
they're
yeah.
offering them
Which was the
usually.
last writing conference you went to?
Let me think. Um, Probably just like last couple panels and stuff. I went to FireCon, which I think was October. I don't think there was too much after that, but FireCon was really good. I went to AugerCon. I can't remember when that was. And I paneled on a bunch of stuff last year, NorwestCon and Flights of Foundry, and I did office hours for the Nebulas and stuff like that. And now I'm signed up for, let me think, a couple things this year as well. So, it's good. I have it going in one monitor and kind of listening in, or I'll listen to, in the evenings sometimes. I have a friend who sends me links to science talks. So I went to one a couple weeks ago about fungal mycotoxins, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. This is disgusting. I can't look away. Yeah. But
So
yeah, because there's kind of nothing else going on. It's either I'm writing or I'm reading or I'm trying to learn something.
well, good for you.
Yes.
So do you find yourself including, like I've just started reading your book, unfortunately. I mean, it's great, but so do you find yourself including a lot or like aspects of your work, like as a scientist?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
More as I go on too, I think. Particularly because because it's taking up so much of my time. It used to be a 40-hour-a-week job. Now it's like 60, 70. I'm actually presenting tomorrow at a work conference. Yeah, good times.
Bad now, taking up your time.
Oh no, that's okay. I was rehearsing earlier today because that's what they pay me to do.
Yeah.
But and again, it's a weird time to be in environmental policy because particularly under our current regime in my province, their big thing being let's run government like a business. Well, one thing that really suffers when that happens is the environment.
Yeah.
And so looking at the decisions that are getting handed down to us from above and at the decisions that we are handing up as policy specialists that they're saying no to has been really, I guess, depressing, but also instructive. And as a sci-fi writer, it's showing me a lot of really interesting things that you don't have to extrapolate very far to turn them into science fiction, because in about 10 years, they're probably going to be real. Things like water wars and stuff like that, and selling water rights, and the loss of our glaciers that provide most of our drinking water, and kind of watching the peatlands up there turn into dry wetlands and then dry lands, and animal extinction. And when things start happening, particularly here in Alberta, they're going to start happening really fast. So that's depressing, but I have to look at it every day at my job. So
you're not saying it's going to be a hellscape, but hey, Okay, another thing that I wanted to talk to you about was genre. Like, I think you kind of mentioned that. Like, so I know that there's this whole Ursula Le Guin talks about this in sometimes, and I love her. I mean, I think she's
me too. Yes.
And I was wondering, like, how do you like? There's genre fiction, and then there's literary fiction. I think the division that's kind of like traditional. And like, how do you feel about that? Do you think that like that's cool? Like, okay, there's genre and it's and then there's literary fiction, or do you think that? And I think Ursula Le Guin kind of feels like literary fiction should be kind of rolled, like it should all be just like there's this stuff and it's about whatever subject and you explore it in whatever like detail. And I don't know, what do you think about that?
Oh, I was just talking to someone about this last night, actually. Gareth Jelly from Intermultiversal, the podcast. And it's become more interesting to me as time goes on, because again, as I mentioned, I go to a lot of these sort of literary events, and sometimes they're not genre events. Sometimes they're lit fic events, or from places that specifically tell you in their guidelines, we do not accept any speculative fiction. No stories with speculative elements. And I'm like, that's fine if that's what you want. And I feel kind of like a spy. Like I go in there and I listen, and sometimes they are literally sitting there shit talking genre. They're going, if you were a serious writer, you wouldn't be writing this crap with wizards and spaceships. And I'm like, okay, well, meanwhile, the people that are writing wizards and spaceships are laughing all the way to the bank. I don't know what you think Star Wars or Game of Thrones is, but the disdain that genre seems to have for lit fic, calling it boring or irrelevant or too closely focused on a single thing, or it's all just professors having affairs with their students, is the same disdain that lit fic has for genre, which is it's all wizards and spaceships and nobody has a coherent thought in their heads and it doesn't mean anything. And the antipathy is really bizarre to me. I read a lot of lit fic, much more than I read genre. Looking at my reading stats for the past couple of years, it's probably 50% literary fiction, 30% nonfiction, 20% everything else. I don't know if the math works there, but
we'll just take it. It's fine.
We'll say it works, but I don't understand the dislike one has for the other, and I don't think the distinctions are necessary. And what I keep hearing from people, though, is that these are distinctions made by the marketing department, and they're meant to physically shelf a book, because if you have a book that's got several elements or whatever, you can't put it on its own shelf that says this is a mix of everything. You have to find somewhere to shelve it. And I don't like that explanation, especially now that there are so many ebooks and audiobooks, and you don't have to worry about the physical bookstore so much. But I also think, aside from subject, there's a fundamental craft difference. And I think literary fiction writers see that more clearly than genre fiction writers do. Especially in the sense of kind of short fiction, where you don't have a lot of room to kind of mess around with this kind of thing. For literary fiction, it's perfectly acceptable to have a story that is just a character epiphany or a deepening of a character, or two characters interacting and nothing happens. Whereas for genre fiction, the expectation is that there will be a plot, that the character desires something, and I guess this extrapolates to novels as well, that the character desires something and is thwarted from getting that thing by the antagonist, and at the end either succeeds or fails. It's basically pure Freytag's triangle. Whereas for literary fiction, they're not quite so hooked on that, and they can have stories where it's just character development. The character learns something about themselves, or they discover something about another character, or all they do for the book is interact with each other, and there's no rising action and falling, and then the denouement and blah blah blah. Genre fiction is formulaic, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it all writes to formulas, because the understanding is that in genre fiction, we are writing because the reader is expecting certain things, and the reader expects those things because they like genre fiction. Someone reading romance reads because they like the happily ever after. If it's a book that doesn't have a happily ever after, that's not a romance. They're going to be very unhappy. To read a novel that has maybe a single science fiction element, your heavy sci-fi reader is not going to be happy. But for lit fic writers, what they do is they take their structure, their character-focused, plot-light structure, and add one sci-fi element. And the lit fic readers and writers and critics are like, well, that's okay. Maybe we'll still nominate it for the Booker. But heavy genre readers are like, no, that doesn't contain the elements that I like. It doesn't contain the tropes that I was expecting. It doesn't have the structure that I want. And there's a lot more experimentation in literary fiction, because they're not stuck on the plot and structure of genre. So it's really kind of two things. It's both structure and subject, I think. But I don't think personally, because I read everything everywhere, and I don't go into a book with those expectations and preferences. I don't think there should be those divisions of something having the speculative element or not having the speculative element, and that being where the line is drawn. I think that's ridiculous. So I agree with Ursula Le Guin there, but then I don't know how you do classify books so that readers can find them and be happy with what they're reading.
Right.
It's genre, but also the issue that we had when Beneath the Rising was on sub was we would get these wonderful rejections back, and they'd say, we love it. Here's a page full of quotes. Here's all the stuff that our editor said. Thank you for letting us read this. Unfortunately, though, we don't know what genre it is, so we're not going to pick it up. So they were like, is this sci-fi or fantasy or horror? And I was like, oh, I don't think about that when I write.
Really good authors have had that problem, so.
Yeah, it's not something that I worry about or that bothers me, but it bothers publishing. Publishing would like to stick it in a box, and they don't want things to touch as much as they do, or if they do touch, they don't want like several genres touching. Right. But I think that's getting better. because people are incorporating fantasy into their sci-fi, and they're incorporating sci-fi into their fantasy, and all of it can have horror elements, and that really reassures me.
Oh, so there's a distinct like element of horror in your book?
I think so. Definitely
I love horror. I love horror.
before it came out, I was seeing it. I was getting very excited because it was coming out on most anticipated 2020 lists, most anticipated sci-fi, most anticipated fantasy, most anticipated horror, and I sat there like, I didn't write a horror book. I'm scared of horror. Like, I can read horror. I can read horror books. I can't watch horror movies. I don't play scary like games or anything. It's just everything is scary.
You're listed as a woman who is notable for her contribution to science fiction and fantasy, whether as authors, editors, illustrators, screenwriters, filmmakers, translators, leaders in fandom, or fictional characters on Wikipedia.
I'm on Wikipedia?
Yeah.
Oh, word. Okay, I did. Wow, thank you. I didn't know that. That must be recent. Yeah, I got a Ladies in Horror Fiction grant last year, literally to teach me how to write horror. So I bought an audio course, and I bought Tim Wagner's Writing in the Dark, which is very good, by the way. And I'm reading how-to horror essays and reading horror short stories and trying to, fill up the warehouse so I can actually write horror intentionally instead of apparently writing it accidentally.
Well, Stephen King is kind of like, I really love his on writing, and he's kind of like, he's one of my favorite writers. And one of the things that he says is that, like, if I can get this right, when he writes the first draft, he writes it for himself, like the door closed, and then when he writes the second draft, he writes it with the door open, and then he thinks about his reader and the world, and. How does that resonate with you, or how do you think?
No, I did like the book. A lot of it did not resonate with me, though, and I think again that's because I live alone and I wrote for so many years with nobody reading my stuff. So it's been a really hard habit to shift, and it's only been a couple of years that I've been publishing stuff, and therefore that people have been reading it, as opposed to the many, many years when I was writing and nobody was reading it. So that's kind of got the weight of like years and years and all that momentum on its side, and then it's got like the tiny little bit of the publishing on this side. So I guess I write my first draft for me, and as I revise, I think of how I want the story to look, and then I give it to my poor agent, who then has to decide whether or not another human being can actually read this story, or I start submitting it to places or whatever. I just, it's not exactly that I have disdain for readers. It's just that I think readers will be fine. If I can read this stuff and I'm fine, a reader will be fine.
Right. Okay.
And that's kind of the philosophy. I'm not thinking of reactions in aggregate. I'm not writing stuff and thinking, oh no, what will people think? I'm thinking, does this look the way I want to look? Does it sound the way I want to sound if I read it in my head? And does this give me the right vibe for this story?
No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah. I think that's a good way of doing it.
But the way Stephen King does it is obviously very successful because he's a hugely successful commercial author. It's worked for him. Yeah. And I very much got that sense in on writing, is that he is thinking of the reader, and that probably does make him a better writer.
I mean, but I think I mean, you would know more about this than I do, but I think everyone is different. Like everyone is gonna, like, part of the process of finding your voice, of finding like is finding your uniqueness,
I think so, yeah. And just trusting your own process and not letting somebody else dictate your process. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I try not to give writing advice, and I just tell people, well, here's what I've done. But what I've done is trust my process, and I wish people would trust theirs.
Oh, I did. I was curious. So I think we communicated, we DM'd each other. We tweeted at one another, and one of the things that you described your work as sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, sort of.
Yeah.
And like, so I'm curious, like, when you were a kid, did you read a lot in those genres?
Yeah. Yeah, I read a lot of everything I could get my hands on. But when I was at the library, I was usually in that area. kind of. And when my parents kind of figured that out, because, of course, you're a kid, you don't have any money. My parents kind of figured that out. They were like, well, what kind of books do you want me to buy for you? And it's like, well, the ones with lots and lots of words. So I ended up with a bunch of big fat, I don't know, you can probably see some of them on the shelves,
I love
collected stories of so-and-so. So I got a collected Edgar Allan Poe. That was just wonderful. I got a collected Robert E. Howard. Yeah, I read a lot of like the kind of Edgar Rice Burroughs, the kind of like pulp adventure stories. That was a huge chunk of my childhood reading. But again, basically it was whatever I could get from the library. My parents didn't really care what I got from the library, provided it didn't have like straight up naked people on the cover or whatever. Like, they kind of glance at it and be like, oh, okay, it's a dragon. This is fine. One of my childhood memories actually is when I was about 8, reading The Hobbit to my little brother, who was about 5, and both of us were just mesmerized. That was the first time I'd read it. Neither of us had ever read anything like that before. I was like, did this guy write anything else? Luckily he did, so that was good.
So I'm just curious, like I don't want to like ask anything too personal of you, but do you like when like you must have I'm guessing like because you published this book, so you probably gave it to your parents to read at some point.
No, I did not.
No?
No, they got 0 complimentary copies. They're kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. And I found this a lot with my other, especially second generation immigrant friends. So our parents came to this country to give us a good life. They sacrificed and they worked crappy jobs and they made sure to save up and send us to good schools. And for a lot of us, we feel like there's no possible way we can repay them by becoming a writer. Because what they want is for you to have a safe and secure future, and the arts aren't really it. A lot of us are really pushed quite hard away from arts. We're pushed towards careers, and this is like from childhood, just the constant never-ending reminders, nagging, sometimes like probably over the top. Nobody in an immigrant family ever says, well, whatever makes you happy. No one says that. They push you towards careers that you can get a reliable job in, that you can provide for yourself. If your husband runs out on you, you'll still have money. You can look after your parents when they get older, yada, yada, yada.
That last one is very important.
Yeah, that's the big one. And if you're a writer, you can't do that. They don't want their kids to starve. I totally understand that. They want their kids to have security, not precarity.
It comes from love.
So yeah, when I told them, I didn't tell them, any of this. I think they knew that I wrote as a hobby because they had to keep buying me notebooks. But when I told them that I had a book deal, their response was, well, how much money was it? So I told them, and then they laughed at me, which legit. So we haven't really talked about it much. My brother bought a copy. I told him not to read it, and he was like, that's A-okay. He's not much of a reader. He learned to read really, really late and never really got into it, which also legit. I know a lot of people that don't read for fun, but yeah, the family, the extended family is sort of like proud, but a little bit hesitant. They're like, well, just don't quit your day job. Keep it as a hobby. I'm like, I have no intention of quitting my day job. Writing doesn't pay. Or well, writing pays if you're very, very talented and have sold lots of books. Writing doesn't pay if you're a debut author.
Well, but I mean, like this is great though. I mean, it's an awesome book. You got a recommendation from Chuck Wendig.
That also meant nothing to them, which I thought was really funny.
Yeah.
But again, they don't read. They don't get the literary side of things. They're like, well, I don't understand why you would want to publish instead of just write. And I was like, there's small amounts of cash.
No, I have writer friends that are exactly like that too.
Yeah.
They have that same dynamic.
Yeah.
So
and it's interesting because it kind of begs the question too, like, why do we publish? Is it just to tell the story? Because if so, then we could just self-publish. Why do we go into traditional publishing? I ask myself this every day. I still don't know.
Did you ever think about self-publishing?
I self-published one thing because
how did it do?
Oh, really good. It's still selling, which is amazing. That was just The Apple Tree Throne, which was a novella. It's like $3 on Amazon. And that actually funded my trip to Worldcon in 2019. Like, it sold so many copies that it literally paid for the entire trip. And I was like, thank you, little book. And then Skyboat Books picked up the audio rights because, of course, I self-publish. I have all the rights, and they produced it as an audiobook, and again sent me CDs.
Nice. I love audiobooks. They're great.
Yeah, the narrator did such a lovely job on this one. I was so impressed.
So given that you said it was a novella, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to see how hard it was to self-publish. Like, I wanted to see what the steps were like, and I asked my agent for permission. And he was like, oh, you don't want to submit this anywhere? See if I can find a publisher? I was like, no, I want to do it. I just this one thing. So he was like, yeah, okay.
You do it on like Amazon? Did you go exclusive to Amazon, or?
No, it's on Amazon and Kobo and Google Play. Yeah. Most of the sales are on Amazon because, one click.
So did you think about like this book that you now have that you've published, like your debut novel?
Mm-hmm.
Did you think about publishing that on your own? No.
I guess I wanted a published book, but I didn't want to do the work.
Right. I get that. I totally get that.
But it's been really interesting to kind of be able to compare and contrast, because obviously if you're self-publishing, you have control over everything. Mm-hmm. And if you're in trad publishing, you kind of give them the manuscript and it goes into a black box. And then it comes out the other side, and all of a sudden you've got 42 copies in your house because of a mix-up at customs.
Well, you also had like an editor, right? Like, I mean, that was part of the tradition.
And that's part of it too. Yes. And I know I have friends that hire editors for their self-published stuff. And I didn't for this, because again, it's just a novella. It's like 27,000 words or something. I didn't think it was worth it. But for a novel or like a series, I probably would. Mm-hmm. So for them, the difference, I guess, is literally that you do have control over the process. You're not going to end up with a cover you hate. You're not going to have to cut out scenes that you like. The book looks exactly the way you want it to look. So.
Okay, so I have a question for you. I think you sort of touched on this, like, so why do you write? Like, obviously, I get the sense from you that it's not the money. I mean, obviously.
It really is not the money. Yeah. If it was more money, then I would say it was the money. It is not very much money. It might be money later. No, I don't know. I love writing. It's my favorite thing to do. It's always been my favorite hobby. It's always been the thing that I want to spend my spare time doing. If back in the before times, I would be out at the bar with my friends or doing karaoke or something or playing badminton. And I'd be thinking, it'd be cool to come home and write for half an hour though. I hope I'm sober, that kind of thing. I like stories. I like lying and I like stories, and I like the shape that stories take when they're done. And to me, that is reward enough for writing something. Like, I've written so much stuff that I obviously haven't given my agent. I've written so much stuff that I've never submitted anywhere. To me, it was enough of a reward to have the story done and look the way I want it to and sound the way I want it to. Kind of as if the story itself was asking to take the shape that it did, which again sounds very woo-woo, but I kind of write with vibes. I vibe my way into things.
Well, I mean, I think that said that I think he used the analogy of dinosaur bones, like you're going out on the beach and you're excavating and you're so like the bones of the story are there.
Yeah,
and cover them.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I often start off like that, like with a skeleton, maybe just a couple of lines, maybe 4 things that I want to happen in the story, or 1 paragraph in the middle that I would then have to put something above and below on. And to me, that's the joy, building it up from that. I used to not outline. Now I love outlining. And again, it helps a lot. It helps me so much with my ADHD. I cannot even tell you. This is the only way I've been able to actually finish novels now. but it feels like that, is that you've got a skeleton and now you're building it into an animal. And you hope that at the end, the animal walks away and it's very convincing and it's real and it breathes and it moves.
Maybe it has a slight limp, but you know,
maybe
it's
it has a slight limp. Maybe the tail is kind of wonky, but it's alive, as opposed to just being bones.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
So do you have any advice? Like we were talking earlier and you said you have a few trunk novels.
So many trunk novels. God, it's like 50, it's literally like 15 or 16 at this point. Yeah.
Would you ever consider like going back over them and maybe...
Most of them, no, they're extremely bad. And again, that's sort of the tuning the ear process. After you read enough books, you start to recognize bad writing when you see it.
Right.
And a lot of these I would consider to be so bad they're unsalvageable.
Okay.
Some of them might or might not be, but they're very much juvenilia. You know, they're written when I was 15 or 16.
Would you consider like taking the ideas that
I'm very much a fan of like pulling out interesting concepts or ideas.
Right.
Yeah. So the premises might get recycled at some point because some of them weren't entirely terrible, but it's a time-consuming process, and when I'm on deadline, it's actually faster to make new material than to go back and dig for old material.
Right.
Like, these aren't bones on the beach; these are bones buried deep down, and some of them are like 400,000 words long, and they're really, really bad. So they taught me to touch. They taught me to touch type when I was like 7 years old, so I'm extremely fast typist.
Oh, nice.
And when I was a kid, to me that seemed like reason enough to like write as much as I wanted because I had gotten this wicked computer and I had WordPerfect on it. Oh my God, this is so cool. God, I hated WordPerfect. Like that bright blue screen, and then you'd look away and everything would be pink and you're like, I think I've damaged my eyeballs.
I do actually.
Yeah. You're like, I hope they update this in some way that lets you change the background color.
God, yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. I'm glad the technology has improved. You know, of course, there's paper and pencils everywhere. Like I have a notebook within 3 inches of my hands at all times. Like,
yeah, you have been absolutely fabulous. I mean, I'm so grateful to you for like being so generous with your time. And I mean,
thank you for the invite. This was fun.
And yeah, I mean, like I've had so much fun talking to you. You're so interesting. I can't I mean, your book is wonderful. I'm really looking forward to reading it. But I do have a final question for you. If you could go back in time and tell yourself one piece of advice about writing, a tip, what would it be?
What would it be? Stories have to end. That would be the tip, because otherwise they just kind of like I would think I was saying this in another interview. A lot of these early ones were very much like rip-offs of Lord of the Rings. So like, you're 13 years old and you're like, I'm gonna write an epic fantasy, and it just goes on and on. There's no actual connections in the plot. People keep showing up and like leaving. There's a cast of like 50 people. I remember at one point there was like a whole subplot involving a key or something, and then like thousands and thousands of words later, nobody's remembered the key. I'm like, weren't there like 10 of you that were supposed to be off like getting this? Yeah, stories have to end.
Okay.
They can't just keep going. And the sign of a really bad story is that it keeps going.
Well, I guess 400,000 words, right?
Oh, at least, yeah. It took up like an entire floppy disk. Oh my God.
Yes, I remember floppy disks.
Oh, back in the day. I watch movies now and they're using floppy disks or like zip disks or whatever. I'm like, oh my God, I remember zip disks. Look at you with your zip disk.
Thank you.
Like, I'm so proud of them. I'm like, look how much storage you have. Now I feel old. Thank you though. This was super fun. I hope you enjoy the rest of your interviews and you get to talk to lots of people.